The howling wind nearly drowned out the sound, a faint whimper coming from beneath the overpass. I wouldn't have heard it at all if I hadn't pulled over to check my map. It was getting dark, the storm was intensifying, and I was already running late. But something made me stop and listen. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the rain. Nothing, just the constant drumming of raindrops on concrete. I was about to leave when I heard it again, a weak, desperate cry that sent chills through me despite the humid summer air. I reached for the flashlight in my glove compartment, silently cursing myself for what I was about to do. The muddy embankment was treacherous as I made my way down, slipping and sliding toward the concrete pillars that supported the highway above. "Is someone there?" I called again, sweeping my flashlight across piles of discarded trash, abandoned shopping carts, and the remnants of makeshift shelters. That's when I saw her. Tucked against the concrete pillar was what I initially thought was a pile of dirty rags. But as my light caught two reflective eyes, my heart sank. It was a dog, or what remained of one. Skin stretched over protruding bones, patches of fur missing, revealing raw, infected skin underneath. She was lying in a puddle of muddy water, too weak to even lift her head as my light fell upon her. "Oh my God," I whispered, my throat tightening. The dog's eyes, cloudy and dull, met mine, and in that moment, something passed between us. Not fear, not hope, something more primal, recognition. Two living beings acknowledging each other in the darkness. I approached slowly, talking in soft tones. "Hey there. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Her body tensed, but she didn't have the strength to run. Up close, the situation was even more dire than I'd thought. Open wounds peppered her emaciated body. One of her legs was bent at an unnatural angle, an old break that had healed wrong. Her breathing was shallow and labored. As I knelt beside her, the smell hit me. Infection, urine, and the unmistakable scent of an animal that had given up. Veterinary volunteers had taught me that smell. It's the scent of surrender. "You can't give up yet," I said, more to myself than to her. "Not while I'm here." I had a blanket in my car and some bottled water, but no food. The nearest emergency vet was at least 30 minutes away, and I wasn't sure she would survive the journey, but leaving her wasn't an option. When I tried to slip the blanket beneath her, she let out a guttural growl, the last defense of an animal that had known only cruelty from human hands. "I know, girl. I know," I soothed, backing away slightly. "But you're going to die here if you stay." The rain was falling harder now, thunder cracking overhead. Water was beginning to pool around us, rising slowly but steadily. The underpass was starting to flood. Time was running out. I called the emergency vet, explaining the situation while keeping my eyes on the dog. They told me what I already knew. Get her there immediately, or she wouldn't make it through the night. I tried again with the blanket, moving even more slowly. This time, her growl was weaker, her resistance fading with her strength. When I finally slid my hands beneath her skeletal frame, she whimpered, but didn't bite. She couldn't have weighed more than 20 pounds, half what a dog her size should be. "I've got you," I whispered as I lifted her. "I've got you now." The climb back up the embankment was treacherous. Twice I slipped, struggling to keep both of us from falling while protecting her fragile body. By the time I reached my car, we were both soaked to the bone, mud-covered and shivering. I turned the heat on full blast and wrapped her in a dry towel I found in my trunk. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing even more shallow than before. The nearest animal hospital was 28 minutes away according to my GPS. I wasn't sure we had that long. "Stay with me," I pleaded as I emerged onto the highway, stealing glances at her still form on the passenger seat. "Just stay with me." The drive was a blur of windshield wipers, flashing lightning, and desperate prayers to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. At some point, the dog stopped making any noise at all, and I had to keep reaching over to feel for breath, for any sign that she was still fighting. 5 more minutes, I kept saying. Just 5 more minutes. When we finally pulled into the emergency vet's parking lot, I didn't wait for an assistant. I scooped her up and ran through the rain, bursting through the doors, with what felt like the last of my own strength. "Please," was all I could say to the startled receptionist. "Please help her." What followed was a flurry of activity. The dog, whom the staff had started calling Lucky, despite the grim irony, was whisked away on a metal table. IV fluids, antibiotics, warming blankets, blood tests. The list of interventions seemed endless. The vet didn't sugarcoat it. She was in critical condition: severe dehydration, malnutrition, heartworm, multiple infections, the broken leg, and likely internal parasites. "Has she been your dog for long?" the vet asked. "She's not mine," I admitted. "I just found her under the highway." The vet's expression shifted slightly. We both knew what this meant. No owner meant no one to pay the mounting medical bills. No owner meant that even if she survived, her future was uncertain at best. "We'll do what we can tonight," the vet said carefully, "but you should prepare yourself, and tomorrow we'll need to discuss options." I understood the subtext. Options meant potential euthanasia if no one claimed financial responsibility. I nodded numbly, watching through the window as they worked on her frail body. I called in sick to work, canceled my plans, and spent the night in the waiting room, making calls to every rescue organization in a 50-mile radius. Most were full. The few that weren't couldn't take a dog with such extensive medical needs. By dawn, I had reached the end of my contact list and the end of my hope. When the vet came to find me, his face told me the news before his words did. "She made it through the night," he said, and I felt my body sag with relief. "But she's still critical. We need to make some decisions." The estimate he handed me was more than a month's rent. I stared at the number, mentally calculating what I could afford, what credit cards I had that weren't maxed out. "I'll cover it," I heard myself say. "All of it?" The vet looked surprised. "All of it," I confirmed, not entirely sure how I would manage, but knowing I couldn't walk away now. He led me to a small treatment room where Lucky lay on a padded table, connected to IV lines and monitors. She looked even smaller in the harsh fluorescent light. But something had changed. When I approached, her tail, a thin, scabbed appendage, twitched slightly. "She recognizes you," the vet said quietly. I reached out slowly, letting her sniff my hand before gently touching her head. Her eyes, a bit clearer now thanks to the fluids, met mine, and I felt that connection again, stronger this time. "Hey, Lucky," I whispered, "you made it." That was 6 months ago. The journey since hasn't been easy. There were setbacks, infections that wouldn't clear, trust that had to be painstakingly built, behaviors born from trauma that needed patient redirection. The broken leg required surgery. The heartworm treatment was brutal. There were nights I slept on the floor beside her, afraid she wouldn't make it until morning. But she fought. With every ounce of her being, Lucky fought to live. Today, as I watch her running across the dog park, her leg healed, though still carrying a slight limp. It's hard to believe she's the same skeletal creature I found beneath the overpass. Her coat is glossy now, her eyes bright and alert. She's gained 30 pounds of healthy weight, and the vet says she's officially heartworm negative. Some scars remain. She still flinches at sudden movements and cowers during thunderstorms. She hoards food sometimes, hiding kibble around the apartment as if preparing for future starvation. But every day, those remnants of her past life fade a little more. When we return home, exhausted from play, she jumps onto the couch, something she wasn't strong enough to do for months, and settles her head in my lap with a contented sigh. I run my fingers through her fur, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath my hand. Who rescued who? People often ask when they hear our story, repeating that well-worn cliché. But there's truth in it. On my darkest days, it's Lucky who gets me out of bed. Lucky who reminds me that survival is possible, that healing happens one day at a time. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't pulled over that night, if I hadn't heard her cry through the storm. One life, seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of things, would have slipped away beneath that overpass, unknown and unmourned. But I did stop. I did hear her. And in saving her, I was reminded of what we all sometimes forget. That every life has value, that none of us is beyond rescue, and that sometimes all it takes to change a life is the courage to reach out through the darkness. There are thousands of Luckies out there, waiting beneath overpasses, in alleyways, behind dumpsters, animals whose only crime was being born unwanted, whose only hope is that someone will stop, listen, and care enough to act. Be that person. Stop, listen, act. Because in the end, the question isn't whether they're worth saving. The question is, who would we be if we didn't try?